But yeah, so my story, I guess back to, when I was, about 17, I went and spent a year. I went to Rongotai College in Wellington, out by the airport. And when I was 17, I went for a year as an AFS exchange student to Germany. So spent a year over there. And that sort of really messed me up in many ways, in that I'd gone to an all-boys school. We'd been, never seen beer before, and all these other things. And you go to Germany, it's much different, and you sort of end up halfway between the school years. So you end up, their school years basically go sort of June to June. And in New Zealand, we obviously go calendar years. So I went over there, and for the first 6 months, it was going into exam time. Was it? No, it was going into their exam time. And I didn't speak any German. And then for the next 6 months, I was fluent in German, but I didn't have any exams, so I didn't have to do any work in either half, really, which was good. And then I came back from a year in Germany, which was fun, and went to university. Went to Vic University here and studied economics, geography, German, some physical sciences, a bit of maths, those sort of things. Didn't really do very well in any of them, which is a bit of a surprise to me. I was kind of pretty good at school, but I came back and had no ability to focus anymore. And so that's probably why I became an entrepreneur, actually, because that sort of lends itself really well to not being able to focus, because you need to do different things every day and you don't really get bored. Was sitting on the ferry coming back from skiing in the South Island, opened up I think it was like calculus or something, so I could do some study before before the exam. Opened it up and looked at the dates and realised that I had, the exam was going on while I was on the ferry. That wasn't good. So I ended up extrapolating. I had basic math, and so being able to extrapolate how many years it would take me to get a degree at my current rate of credit accretion, and it would be about 20 years. So I think I was best to sort of leave at that point. So I went and worked for my dad for a bit, mostly doing sort of graphic design sort of work. So I love all this sort of stuff, all this sort of desktop publishing, sort of graphic design, all this sort of stuff. Sort of where I started really getting a bit of a passion for that sort of stuff. So I can talk at length about fonts if I need to. So I was doing that for my dad, and then saw an ad in the newspaper when they still had classifieds, and went and worked at Deloitte. So I had this kind of went into the graduate intake really at Deloitte despite not having graduated, but I sort of fluked my interview because I walked in, and the manager that was interviewing me that day had all these problems with his computer and with his presentations and all this sort of stuff. And he was like, I'm really stressed out. And so I was like, I can sort that out. So before the interview, I just basically sorted everything out for him on his computer within 5 or 10 minutes. And he's like, you're hired. so sort of, I guess, you can either go to university and get several degrees, or you can just fluke it in an interview. And that really got me into a really good track at Deloitte. So I then went and worked there for 3 or 4 years between the ages of sort of 20 and 24, and did the corporate thing. So we were doing online purchasing projects at Telecom and intranet projects at the Ministry of Justice, and basically sitting there as a basically the same age as you guys, sort of sitting there talking to these 45-year-old managers being charged out at $200 or $300 an hour as a consultant that looks weird in a suit, because you're obviously don't look old enough to be wearing a suit at that point, really. Did that for a few years and worked my way through from graphic design really through websites, which was sort of websites and intranets and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of work in that area, and then into databases and coding properly, and at that point I thought I really need to learn how to code really properly, so I sort of need a project, and so I went, so I kind of looked around, what am I going to do, and I ended up building TradeMe off the back of really just deciding to give that a go as a project, as a practical way to learn. And the opportunity, I think, with TradeMe, so I started that when I was 23, The opportunity with that was really back in the day they had the Trade and Exchange newspaper, and if you wanted to sell something, you would phone them up, put the ad in the paper will come out on Thursday morning or Wednesday morning or something, and then a week later they would publish those ads that went in that paper on their website, by which time obviously everything had sold. So you'd have phone numbers only, no photos, it was all, it's obviously very obvious that the internet would be able to do that much better. So the original idea was really not an auction site. I didn't really know about eBay at the time. We sort of started off really targeting the trade exchange because that was just such a antiquated, broken kind of model. And so basically, painted them, got some sign writing on my car and got some postcards printed and dropped them around the neighbourhood and got my family to sort of list some stuff for sale. And we kind of started to grow, and we sort of were just growing at 10, 20%, 30% a month through, and we just did that for 8 years. So now in the building next door here, Trade Me, I'm on the board, and so we've got I think 300 staff or something. When we sold the business to Fairfax, who's a big newspaper company in Australia. We had 40 staff, so we still only had 40 staff at that point. And then when I left in 2008, we had I think maybe 120, 140 staff, something like that. So that was a really interesting sort of journey doing that Trade Me thing. And I guess at the time I didn't recognise probably fully how it's actually quite hard to build businesses and make money, but because we or to grow businesses that fast. It's kind of unusual. I didn't really realise it at the time because it was kind of my first business, and sort of seemed to go okay, and got to the end of it, and then since then I've been investing in other companies and actually making money building businesses is actually quite hard. So that was quite an unusual sort of first experience, really growing a business. But what I kind of did for those years was a process of really following your nose and rapid iteration of things. So we would, because we had all this data, we could do things like make fonts bigger or make photos bigger or change category structures or whatever, and we would know certainly within a day, usually within a couple of hours, whether that was a positive change or a negative change. And then within 2 or 3 hours we'd reverse the change or we'd keep the change and we'd learn from that. And so we kind of did that for basically all of those years. 7, 8, 9 years we were basically just rapid iteration. So I built the original site in a few weeks, and that was pretty rudimentary. You could log in, you could list the classified, you could email people, all that sort of stuff. And so I went from not knowing how to build a vertically integrated system to basically learning how to do that and building the whole thing within sort of like a few weeks. And that was a real sort of revelation to me as well, just how kind of quickly you can upskill in things to a level of being kind of useful, mildly useful. And I've sort of, it's one of the lessons I've sort of taken away is how fast you can actually get pretty well up to speed with, through books or Wikipedia or whatever. You can actually become quite an expert in global politics, like within a month if you want. And I think we sort of have a culture a little bit of you need to sort of go through this process of learning and get your learning out of the way, and then you start working. And I think there's this, if you have something which is kind of interesting, you can actually become pretty deadly in a dinner conversation anyway within quite a short period. And the sort of things that I work in require that level of knowledge now, which is going to sort of 60-70% of understanding of anything and thinking, oh well, that's kind of enough, and I can kind of get by on that, and then kind of getting interested in something else. So I haven't really become very, very good at anything in particular, but I have gone reasonably deep on quite a lot of things, and so I can talk about with some depth and experience about everything from sort of building websites to corporate governance, design, poverty or global politics, just because of what I kind of am interested in and what I've kind of done. So after the Trade Me thing, what did I do? I basically was there for another 2 years after the sale as part of an earn-out. It's a pretty typical process when you sell a company. They require you to kind of stay around for a couple of years. And then they kind of want you to go often. That wasn't really the case, but maybe it was subconscious and subtle, and I didn't notice that I was pushed out. But 2 years later, I sort of left, and since then I've been doing sort of 2 or 3 things really. So I've been investing in companies. So I've spent a lot of time looking at companies, looking at different business models, looking at teams, and looking at people who have achieved various things. And they range from, yesterday I had a company blow up on me, so I put quite a lot of money into, enough money for a decent house in Auckland, into a company, and it's gone. And then I put a similar amount of money into Xero, which is across the road now, and has like 300 or 400 people, and that's kind of taking me from 1 decent house in Auckland to like 15 decent houses in Auckland if I wanted, in terms of the investment. So it's real hits and miss sort of game, and so it's all about sort of pattern recognition and recognising what is what's going to work and what's not going to work, and a lot of that comes down to business models and teams and traction. Like what have you actually done? Because having an idea is, ideas are free basically. So it's all about, I've got this cool idea. It's I actually don't care what it is. It's like, how many have you sold? It's like, oh, none yet. It's like, well, how am I supposed to know what the right price is, or how many you could sell, or how big the market is, or whatever, or whether you've got the ability to sell one or brand it, or do all those sort of things. Nothing sort of speaks quite like customer validation and having sold a few. So you sort of look for those things really as a very basic lens on early stage investing. Do you have a team that kicks ass, good validation in terms of customers buying a few of them, and some momentum, and ultimately a business model that can make a lot of money. You don't want to go into a business which, if you're really successful and have 1 million customers, still makes no money, because that would be a bit pointless. Google might still buy you for $1 billion if you still don't make any money, but there are 10 million of those sort of companies and they buy 2. So it's just a percentage thing. You're much better to create a business that makes some money. Because ultimately the only thing that's sustainable is stuff that kind of can pay for itself and make some money. And ultimately, if we all want sort of better schools and hospitals and all those sort of things, then the way we do that is through greater tax receipts, and the only source of tax receipts really is business, because it's either through wages or it's through people using their wages to buy groceries and paying GST, or it's driving their cars around that they bought with their wages, so it's all about jobs and wages, and the only thing that really does that is business. And then you get tax come in, and then maybe you get a job in government, but ultimately that money you were paid working for government came from a business that paid tax at some point, that allows people to kind of work on interesting policy stuff to create the right environment for business. Social services don't make any money, and you actually need money to buy anything. So, or do anything if you want better schools, better healthcare, better any of those things. So to me, business is kind of where it's at, and it's really kind of the most interesting area. So I've been doing that sort of stuff. I'm on the board of a few companies, so board of Xero across the road, board of Trade Me here, and board of Fairfax, which is a big Australian newspaper company which is quickly going from massive to smaller. So that's an interesting challenge when you look at how many people here buy a newspaper every day. Yeah, that's our problem basically.
My dad does.
Yeah. So that's basically the rate of change in circulation for newspapers is very similar to the mortality rate for the population. So what happens is when 75-year-old people die, it's not replaced by a 25-year-old who now buys the paper. So you basically just have this 3% per year of people dying, and that's kind of paper. So that's a bit of a challenge. So it's really interesting kind of going from, that business. We built a $250 million printing plant, amazing printing plant. You just go in there and just watch the papers fly past, and we're shutting because no one's buying papers. So it's, totally different business challenges and those sort of things. Lots of layoffs. Journalists and non-unionised workforces get paid like $60,000, $70,000. In Australia, they get paid like $150,000. So because they unionise, they get paid per year of service. So like to fire someone costs you $500,000 because you've got to write them a big cheque. So it's major structural challenges in those businesses. But for that said, I've got all the news on my iPads and whatever, and it's awesome. So from a consumer perspective, I'm really happy. So a few board seats doing the company investment sort of stuff, and then also spend quite a lot of time on philanthropy. So I sold my trade me at the age of 30, and I woke up the next day and I had nearly $300 million, which is I worked out was more than I needed. I think there's 2 or 3 ways you kind of go about dealing with that. One is you sort of double down and try and double it, in which case you have an equal chance of going bankrupt trying to do that. $300 million, you can actually borrow like $2 or $3 billion and actually do some quite fun stuff. But you need to, there's risk associated with that. So I kind of worked backwards and I said, well, what would I really like to do with my life? And I just had a couple of kids as well. And how much money do I need? And so let's just say I need $1 million a year, just for messing around. So $1 million a year and $300 million and maybe 5% a year on that, so you make 15 a year. So you actually make 14 a year without going anywhere, without doing anything, spending. So you just got much more money than you could possibly ever do anything with, because it keeps getting bigger. So what I sort of thought was, okay, so I need to give it away. And so how do I want to give my money away? And I sort of said, well, there's no point. I really struggle with New Zealand. People think $300 million is quite a lot of money. I don't mean to harp on about that, and I usually don't. But if you think about the government budget, the government spends. How much does the government spend a year on welfare? 20 billion or something? It's about 20 billion. So 20 billion is about 500 million a week. So I could, with $300 million, I could fund New Zealand social welfare for like 5 days. So in New Zealand, a population of 4 million people, and they might, with that, be able to get an extra couple of loaves of bread. Or you can go and work in populations where people are profoundly poor. So if you look at, I've just come back from India, and in India, you deal with, there are people that are really poor there, and 70 to 80% of the poorest people in the world are farmers. So, and you can do a lot with farmers. So you can go into a farm and you can actually just provide them a bit of seed, and they can grow twice as much food. Bit of seed, bit of fertilizer, and they can grow twice as much food. And with twice as much food, they have twice as much income, and that takes them from a couple $100 to, maybe $400 or $500 a year. But that's the difference between being hungry for like 3 or 4 months a year, between harvests, or putting your kids in school. You usually have quite a lot of kids, and they might send 1 or 2 to school, just the boys. So there's all sorts of things that you can do if you can find the right place to invest tactically. So we've got it down to a point now where we basically have a very similar model. We look for things that can really go to scale, that have good intrinsic economics. So that means, to save a mum's life in childbirth through a good program, which is at scale, because maternal mortality is a big issue in these countries. It costs you about $200 would be if you're doing it well. And we've got pretty good line of sight now for about $200. You can do that. So you start to talk about those sort of numbers, and you can actually do quite significant change. So that's quite exciting as well. But the most sort of exciting thing about it is you're actually dealing with the same sort of people. So you're dealing with people with spreadsheets that know how to do design, that know how to do sales, that know how to do outreach, that know best practice, in their field. They know the stuff that works, they know the stuff that doesn't work. They've spent 20 years working for the UN and have come out completely disillusioned and decided that's a waste of time. They've done all those sort of things. So you're dealing with these people who are unbelievably capable and have just decided that instead of going and building another company, they'll go and build a company doing solar lights or whatever the latest thing is, helping poor farmers or whatever. So that's sort of largely the balance that I have now. So I spend about a third of my time on the philanthropy stuff. I have a couple of staff running that for me. Because I want to kind of live in New Zealand and I've got young kids and all that sort of stuff, I don't want to spend 9 months of the year over in Sudan or anywhere. So I kind of go and do that, but I fly home, I go there for a couple of weeks and come home. So I spend most of my time in New Zealand. Haven't found a lot on the social side to do in New Zealand, being honest. So you can spend quite a lot of money saving tuis and stuff like that, or you can, you quite quickly butt up against government. So if you want to do anything in health, if it's a real health need, it's actually dealt with already in New Zealand. And so therefore you're not dealing with high impact, low cost stuff, vaccinations, saving mums in childbirth, that sort of stuff. You're dealing with extremely expensive cancer treatments, where you've got put $100,000 into someone and still 9 out of 10 of them will die within 2 years. So $100,000 into each, $1 million into the whole lot. So you're saving one person for $1 million, then they get an extra 2 years of life. So you're basically buying an extra $500,000 per year for one person versus what you can do with the sort of economics of that in other countries. So most of our philanthropy is offshore. Most of my time is spent here. Most of my time is spent on business stuff, and I find that informs my philanthropy really well, because ultimately good managers all look the same, good governance all looks the same, good financials all look the same, good products all look the same, good design all looks the same, good sales all looks the same. So it's all just that stuff is what kind of drives the value. So anyway, that's kind of me.